Sorry for the technical trouble, guys. So we were discussing about the modification to a lease arising due to COVID situation when there's a reduction in lease rentals, right? I told you if it was a normal modification and if this practical expedient was not available to us, then I would have arrived at in this situation without applying practical expedient. I would have calculated the revised lease liability, reduction in lease liability, and such reduction I would have applied it in this particular manner as an accounting entry. I would have reduced both lease liability and the RU asset. Now my question is, if the practical expedient had to give, it was supposed to give me a relief from all this computation. What is the relief that he has actually given me? Let's see. Lease modification. Practical expedient due to COVID applied. If I have applied the practical expedient of COVID, then how would I actually account for this modification to the lease? The lease rental, which was earlier about 1 lakh, has now reduced to only 50,000. So what is the practical expedient that he's saying? He is saying there is no change in lease liability and the value of ROU asset. Don't change anything. Let it be the same. Second thing he comes up and says is, whatever concession that you got on lease rentals, should be credited to P&L. What does it mean? It means that look at the lease liability computation now. When I look at the concept of lease liability, for the year 2020-21, I would have measured like this. The year in which the concession was available. What was the lease modification? What is the lease liability before the modification? Lease liability before modification was 3,16,988. 3,16,988. Add it with the amount of interest at 10%. Interest would have been 31,699. Reduced by actual repayment was only 50,000, but don't take 50,000, take entire 1 lakh. No, don't consider the reduction. Now you calculate 3,16,988. Add the interest minus the amount of 1 lakh being the lease payment. So I would have got the answer as 2,48,687. This is the lease liability at the end of 2021. What about the ROU asset? Again, no change in the value of ROU asset as well. What was the ROU asset earlier before lease amendment? The ROU asset was recognized at 39,000 or 3,79,080 and the depreciated over 5 years term. Today, the value was 303,264. $37,908 is the depreciation. 37,908 depreciation. I would have got the answer as 2,65,356. Now you will say, sir, entry won't tally like this. Because I did not pay 1 lakh, but I actually paid only 50,000. Entry won't tally. I will make it tally. So now I will record the entry like this. When you are writing the lease interest, what is the entry? Finance cost account debit. I'll have to credit it to the increase in lease liability due to finance cost. Amount for me, in this case, for this year of 2020-21, I'm writing entries for the year 2020-21 itself. Amount would have been 31,699 rupees of interest. When I make the repayment, there should be a reduction in lease liability. So I should have written lease liability account debit. I am saying for the purpose of applying practical expedient, there is no change in measurement of lease liability. So lease liability should be reduced by 1 lakh by debiting the same amount. But unfortunately, since there was a lease concession which is given during 1 year period, my amount paid through bank will only be considered as 50,000. How did the entry tally? I will tally the entry by adding one more amount to lease concessions. This lease concession of 50,000 rupees, whatever I credited, is a practical expedient available due to COVID inserted into Ind AS 116 in the year 2021. Now this amount should be charged to or should be credited to P&L. Not charged to P&L, should be credited to P&L. So I hope you have understood what is the practical expedient which is available due to COVID to lessees whenever they are trying to recognize the lease liability and the RUSA. What did I say to sum up with? I said, whenever we come across a situation where due to COVID, there is a reduction of lease rental. There is a reduction of lease rental, and such reduction of lease rental is only for such rent which falls due up to 30th June 2021. And there is no other change in any other lease term. No other condition of the lease has changed. Only the lease rental has changed, and there is a reduction of lease rental only up to the rent which falls due up to 30th June 2021. Then the lessee is allowed to apply this practical expedient available. What is he saying? Don't account for this as lease modification. That means if it is not considered as lease modification, I will not alter the value of RUSA, neither I will alter the value of lease liability. They will be continued to measure at the same valuation as it was originally assessed. However, the amount of reduction in lease rental allowed due to COVID shall be treated as lease concession, and such lease concession should be credited to P&L. This is the significant change which occurred and which is available to the lessees only under this practical expedient which is inserted due to COVID. Guys, as such, if you look at, this was only a temporary relief, because this relief was only available for lease rentals which have been reduced up to the year or up to the date of 30th June 2020. However, there is an exposure draft which has released and which is now increasing their scope up to 30th June 2022. Okay, this is only a draft at this point of time when I am recording this lecture. It might pass very soon, because even on 30th June 2021, you still find that this situation of lockdowns are occurring here and there, and there's a very much a possibility of another COVID wave or another lockdown which can appear. So that is the reason why it is being identified, or it is being at least reviewed to extend this provisions or to extend this relief for lease rentals which are falling due up to 30th June 2022. Clear? This is a practical expedient or a temporary relief which is available to the lessee whenever there is a lease modification of reduction in lease rental, which is only applied for the situation of COVID. There is no other change in terms of the conditions of the lease. All other conditions remain the same except for there is a reduction in lease rental. You can apply this temporary relief or the practical expedient which is allowed to the lessee. Guys, when I said practical expedient itself, you might have understood that it is the option of the lessee whether to apply or not to apply. If some person or some lessee is not interested in applying this practical expedient because he believes that the lease concession directly being credited to P&L is not appropriate, he can always apply IND AS 116 other provisions regarding lease modifications, change the value of lease liability, change the value of ROU asset, whatever we have seen already. Without applying practical expedient, he can apply those paragraphs very much. There is no compulsion that the lessee should always apply or should compulsorily apply this practical expedient. This is only a relief which is at the option of the lessee. Lessee wants to apply, he will apply. If he doesn't want to apply, he will apply lease modification under IND AS 116. Guys, do you really believe that anyone will not apply this if he knows that there is such a relief which is available? Or do you think he will go on with his Excel sheet and start calculating everything, all lease computations over the lease term? If the unexpired lease is significantly high, then imagine how many lease payments you have to discount again, how much of lease liability reduction might happen. All this computation, if you want to repeat, then no one can save you. But in general sense, a lessee is more or less inclined towards applying this practical expedient or this temporary relief because most of the lessees have got this lease concessions over this period whenever there was a lockdown due to COVID. Clear? So this is a new paragraph which is inserted. It is only temporarily applicable. It is only temporary applicability up to 30th June 2021 as of now, and it could extend up to 30th June 2022. That's it. That's it. Even that date of 2022 is not confirmed as on the day when I record this video. So you can please look at it. How is it being extended? Or I will make sure that you people are notified if there is such extension which actually comes. It is already being given as an exposure draft, but the exposure draft has to be adopted by ACA to basically amend the standard. So MCA has to again revise its standards. So as such, there is nothing which is done as on today's date. So the lease modification for COVID or the practical expedient is only available up to 30th June 2021 as on this date. Clear? So let's move into the next paragraphs of the standard.